live. How's it going, Mets fans? This is your boy Wardy, and I am accompanied by a special guest, good friend of mine, long time no see. Haven't had him on the channel in a while, but happy to have him back. And that is co-host of SNY's Mets Pod, of course, there with Connor Rogers, none other than Joe Demayo. Joe, thank you so much for taking the time tonight to join here. I'm really excited to get into this one.
No problem, Morty. Good to see you. I haven't seen you in a while. Congratulations on becoming a father here in the
Thank
in the
you.
coming months.
Thank
But
you.
yeah, let's talk some Mets. It's been an eventful last 24 hours or so.
Yes, I'd say that's an understatement. I didn't go to bed till like 6 a.m. It was a very long night for me. And as someone that, unfortunately, the only downside, I think, and you could probably relate to this to a degree, when not only being a Mets fan, but also a content creator, is you really buy in. And when you're following every single report and following along with these big sweepstakes, and Yamamoto, the magnitude, wherever he would land, would be so significant. So once we found out that news last night, that definitely took quite a bit for myself to marinate. And that's really what I want to start off the show with. So for everyone first chiming in live on a replay, we're going to get into all the latest in Mets land. I'm going to hear Joe's further thoughts on the Yamamoto news. And from there, we're going to break down how do the Mets properly pivot from here. Of course, I've already spoken at great length what the Mets may do, but I want to hear Joe's perspective especially. And of course, from there, we'll get on to the bat needs, DH, outfield. Where will the Mets potentially go there? Maybe some bullpen fits, and that's pretty much going to be it for tonight's show. But Joe, I do want to congratulate you. I know that you were up for the running with some big awards for podcasting. So why don't you let everyone know what exactly those are?
Yeah, the Mets Pod is up for 2 sports podcast awards, which you can go to, I think it's sportspodcastawards.com. I'm doing a great job of plugging myself, but if you go on at SNY TV on Twitter, it's pinned to their profile, the link. Please go vote for the Mets Pod for best baseball podcast and best team podcast. So obviously coming from a spot where Connor and I started a podcast independently, ended up getting picked up to do the Mets Pod with SNY, to now a couple years in being up against some other very great podcasts for sports podcast awards is pretty crazy. So if you can, please go vote, and let's take at least one of these home. That's our goal. If we get one of the two, that's a win.
Well, you got my vote, Joe. So there you go. Hopefully, you guys end up laying those. Both you and Connor have done a great job. It feels like yesterday I was talking with you guys and you were getting the YouTube channel started, and then bam, SNY, of course, picked you up, and here where you are now. Same thing with my good friends Mark and James with Mets Up. Like, it's been so awesome to see how much the community has grown over the past couple of years. It's been nothing short of a treat. But unfortunately, what has not been a treat was the result of these Yamamoto sweepstakes. So let's hop right in. Joe, I want to know, what was your initial reaction when you found out the news from Jack Curry yesterday that Yamamoto is headed to LA?
I mean, I was like, wow, that stinks. I honestly convinced myself he was going to be a Met. I mean, I know that there was all the reports from SNY's Andy Martino and John Heyman of the Post, and anywhere you could read, the Mets were looked at largely as in the race, but behind the Dodgers and the Yankees.
Right.
I just refused to believe it. I was like, Steve Cohen flew across the world to go see this guy. When they had their second meeting, Steve Cohen invited him into his personal family home. Steve Cohen had the money. And obviously when they came in at $325 million, which, you know, we'll find out more details as time goes on, but it sounds as if the offers were much lower from other teams. The Mets came in at 325, and Yamamoto's camp brought it to Yamamoto, and brought it to the Dodgers and said, can you match this? If you match this, you'll be a Dodger. Because what it comes down to is, as much of time as he spent with the Mets and the Yankees, it was evident that the allure of playing with Shohei Ohtani and Freddie Freeman and Mookie Betts on a team that's already won 100-plus games, while also getting the biggest contract in the history of the game for a pure pitcher, that was something that unfortunately the Mets couldn't match. And now's the time that, you know, you have to pivot. You talk about it for a day or two, and then it's just on to the next.
It is on to the next. Exactly, Joe. And, you know, my biggest takeaway from this, because I said, if the Mets lose out on Yamamoto because of factors they can control, then naturally I'm going to feel a certain way, not only with Stearns and Cohen, because we were kind of led to believe that this was a direction that they were going in, that they would be all in. And ultimately, that was still the case here. From all the reporting that we've heard to this point, the Mets, again, had the structure exactly what Yamamoto was pretty much looking for, took that to LA. As soon as he found out that LA, you know, was willing There you go. There was your deal. And the Mets didn't even have an opportunity to do a counteroffer. So, for people wondering, were the Mets in a position where they were able to go higher? No, they weren't, because according to everything we've heard at this point, that was not even a chance. So, very similar to Craig Counsell, Shohei Ohtani, the Mets, they got nowhere with, not even past potentially preliminary discussion. So, it's been unfortunate. Initially heading into this offseason, there was a lot of high hopes, expectations. We have this every year, but between Ohtani, Soto, Counsell, now Yamamoto, one way or another, it's a big swing and a miss for the Mets this offseason, what they were hoping to do, at least to a degree, versus what the current reality is. So how do they properly pivot from here? I did a very late night or early morning video this past day describing what I think the Mets are going to be bound to do from all we know. But before I share my further thoughts on that, Joe, I want to know for you, what do you anticipate the Mets to do, and what players in particular have caught your eye the most that's still available in the free agent and or trade market?
So I don't know that there's going to be a proper pivot in the sense
Right.
of trying to get something of Yamamoto's ilk. That is, from everything you hear, everything I've heard, is right now that is not in the Mets' plans to go and pivot to another big name, whether that be a hitter or a pitcher. Um, of course, that is prefaced with Steve Cohen could wake up on January 15th and say, you know what I want today? I want Blake Snell. And he could wake up and he could just go do it. And he did that with Carlos Correa while he was having a couple drinks in Hawaii. So, like, that's the one thing that can't ever rule it out. But it sounds as if the direction that David Stearns wants to go is mainly short-term deals, maybe almost all short-term deals, to put themselves in a position to contend in 2024 for a playoff spot. Now, I think maybe some Met fans are a little harder on that than maybe warranted. I think getting to a playoff position, just think, as bad as things went in 2023 for the Mets. I mean, what, they win 77 games, I think? Was it 77 or
Your guess is as
something like
good
that?
as mine.
Yeah. I think it was 77. The playoffs are 84. So it's really not like absurd to make up a 7, 8, 9 game difference over
Right.
162. With that said, there is a glaring need in the starting rotation, at least one. My preferred candidate, if he is willing to sign for 2 and an opt out or 1 year, big money, it's Lucas Giolito. That is the pitcher that would be on the top of my priority list. If you just look at his first half this past year, pitched to about a 3.7 ERA. And this is a guy that has made at least 29 starts every year back to, I believe, 2018, not counting the COVID year of 2020.
Mhm.
So this is, I think, a good mix of ceiling and floor. The ceiling is he could pitch to a 3.5 ERA for you. The floor, he's going to take the ball every time out. So even if it's ERA, it's maybe closer into the low fours or in that range, you at least know you have a guy that's going to take the ball every fifth day. And I think the Mets do need some reliability. As much as it would be great to have an ace, they don't grow on trees. And Yamamoto was a unique opportunity for them. I don't think the pivot is a Blake Snell or a Jordan Montgomery, who are, looking at Snell maybe in the 200 million range and Montgomery maybe in the 150, 160 range. That doesn't feel like the right move at this time for the Mets. Giolito, Mike Clevenger, Hyun-Jin Ryu. There's a list of stars that are kind of in that roughly that tier. And I'd like to see the Mets, if they can get 2 of them, that's great, but certainly at least 1 of them.
So a lot of things I want to say in response to that, because Giolito is someone where we look at his past couple years, since the sticky substance breakdown has happened, he has not been the same pitcher. So that definitely has played a factor. He, of course, like everyone else, has to adjust on the fly since then, and I'm sure he's going to rebound eventually here. But between that, the fastball really struggled with this past season that we noticed. And 2, he did have off-the-field issues going on. I know that he unfortunately had a divorce with his now ex-wife, like mid-season. And that type of thing, of course, can have a toll on any athlete, because we're human at the end of the day, right? So he's dealing with that on the side as is, and he was on 3 teams, getting traded to LA. They do a historic thing and acquire all these players, say, you know what, we know we're not going to make playoffs. Let's just cut all of them. He gets picked up by the
Crazy.
Guardians to conclude the 2023 season. So it was definitely a year where there was a lot to be desired if you're Lucas Giolito, but he's looking to bounce back. There are similarities to Severino in the sense of guys where they've shown the potential. They're 29, 30 years of age. If you can land them on short-term deals, you like the potential there. Of course, I hate the idea of, we're going from a Yamamoto to potentially a Lucas Giolito to round out the rotation. But unfortunately, this is something that I emphasize so long with fellow Mets fans watching the channel right now. This was a Yamamoto or bust offseason. Not in the sense of the Mets being productive, but in the sense of really the type of direction their rotation would be heading into 2024 and beyond. He was that one unique exception because he's 25 years of age. He fits the short and long-term bill. If he was 30 years of age, I think the Mets would still have a high interest level, but there would be maybe a little bit more reluctance versus him being 25, or, they had opt-outs on, say, the 5th year and potentially 8th year. They did all they could. So it's unfortunate that it didn't go in their favor like a lot of things here in Mets land, but they do, of course, have to pivot here. Giolito, I like on the short term. I have a feeling he's going to want probably a 3-year deal. That's where I'm not interested truly. When you look at the other short-term options and you look at next offseason's free agent class, there's a lot of aces available there. And of course, the Mets need to prove that they can be not only a destination where you're spending money, but is desirable, which is why I also haven't implored all Mets fans to realize the Mets are not punting in 2024. No matter how much you might want to think or say otherwise, they're not going to, because it's going to hurt them so much more than you could possibly think, including how they approach the free agent market heading into next offseason. But for me, and this is a question I have for you, Joe, Shota Imanaga is another guy that might find himself in the mix, at least for the Mets, where they at minimum should be doing heavy due diligence on. I know that they have an interest level there, but Imanaga heading into this offseason, of course, a veteran southpaw coming from the MPB, 2.81 ERA this past year there. Gave up home run at a solid rate we saw in the MPB, but really nice off-speed pitches. His arm tends to project well at the MLB level from everything I've seen. He may get around a Kodai Senga-esque contract of 5 years, $75 million to probably north of 100 now, given how this pitching market is costing us. But if you look at Imanaga, do you think he's someone that would be a reasonable fit in the cards for this rotation? Or do you think it's better off if, say, they go with 2 one-year options and really hone in by the trade deadline or next offseason?
I would say more hone in on the short-term trade deadline. And then you mentioned next year's market, because when we talk about this year's market and how everyone's like, it's moving so slow because of Ohtani, and then it's moving slow because of Yamamoto, I think it's a little overblown. It's a factor. I think the reason this market's not moving that fast is because it isn't that good of a market.
It's so
teams are not in a rush to pay most of the players in this class that naturally want multi-year deals. But when you think about Shota Imanaga, he's a guy that, talking to a couple people, they kind of think of him more, back end, like maybe a number 4 type starter with potential to be a 3. I don't think he has quite the stuff that Senga has. He's gonna make money due to the market, and maybe that projection's light on him. But I haven't gotten the vibe from anybody that I've spoken to that he projects as a guy that could pitch towards the front of the rotation, which means someone else could give him $100 million. Like there's got to be a line in the sand at some point. When you look ahead to next year, I know fans don't want to think about 2025. They only care about 2024. But you have a Pete Alonso extension coming up. You have all the aces that you talked about. Corbin Burns is a free agent. Shane Bieber, Zach Wheeler, Walker Buehler. Bunch of pitchers are free agents next offseason. Juan Soto's a free agent next offseason. I would be a little reluctant to commit long-term, pretty good money to a pitcher that, I don't think he has the same potential that I thought Senga had this time last year when the Mets signed him.
I agree with you.
Wouldn't be for me, but yeah, it wouldn't be for me. With that said, I know the Mets have shown some interest, so I'm not going to say there's no chance that it happens. But it sounds as if the Mets are really not going in a direction of a long-term anything.
So, yeah, and that's the tendency that we seem to get to this point. And the reason why I think I'm more of a heavier proponent from Imanaga is, one, I've known about him for a number of months now. And after watching his film, there are a lot of things about his arsenal that I certainly like, especially, the multi-pitch mix guys from the MPB. All of them have at least one nasty splitty or forkball that's always appealing. And I understand with someone like him, the home run rate wasn't nearly to the degree that was like liking the way Yamamoto was. Yamamoto only gave up, I believe, 2 home runs in the regular season this past season. Wasn't the case with Imanaga, but I do think even if you're spending north of $100 million for someone like him, that too can still make sense knowing that Luis Severino, Jose Quintana, and a lot of other contracts are off the books a year from now. So I don't blame the Mets for not wanting to overspend on a Blake Snell, because I do not expect him to project well whatsoever. Even though we know Cohen has a willingness to eat bad contracts towards the end of them, why even bother, especially for a Mets team heading into next season? It doesn't on paper have those World Series contender aspirations, right? If they were in that type of situation, I think Snell can make a bit more sense. And Montgomery, I like Monty a lot, but he's going to be looking for a Carlos Rodon type contract, and he may very well get it given this type of market right now for the teams that lost out on Yamamoto especially. So I don't blame them there when you know you don't want to block, mid-rotation guys when a year from now you could potentially land 1 or 2 ace caliber pitchers for this rotation. But Imanaga, I do think, is a nice exception. He's someone that I'm personally in favor of. I definitely would like to see him pair with Senga and see what they can provide for the next couple years. But if they do go the short-term route specifically and say a Mike Clevenger and a Giolito, or just one of them, and maybe acquire another piece that's similar to an Adrian Hauser, I'm not opposed to that either. I do have trust in Stearns and Cohen and what they're trying to build here, but I know that for the fans, naturally, even if they're doing everything that they basically said that they were going to do, it's still not going to sit right with us, because we all got our hopes up here with Yamamoto, and that's normal. I understand it not only as a creator, but as a fan. We have to go through these things together. But before we get further in the show, appreciate everyone chiming in. We have over 400 concurrent viewers. Make sure you smash that like and subscribe on. Also, make sure to check out Joe on his Twitter at PCL to Flushing, and all of his work, where he does a fantastic job covering all things Mets prospects. Pat Mets with a $20 donation here says, wishing you both a very Merry Christmas and Happy Healthy New Year. Thank you so much. Same to you. He goes on to say, I believe the Mets are going to be okay after this with David Stearns. Built contenders out of the Brewers with not as many resources that he has with the Mets. Absolutely. No, I have a lot of excitement and faith in David Stearns and what he's doing. People seem to forget just how much he has to deal with as soon as he became the new Pobo. Billy Epler was supposed to be here for one. That did not happen. So that's a mind that he was initially going to help bank off of to help him get acclimated with the Mets. That was not the case. So already an uphill battle. Then you have to deal with building a new coaching staff, an entire new front office. And this is at least the second time since Steve Cohen became owner that he has this amount of turmoil. So the most important thing for the Mets, not only heading into 2024 and beyond, and Joe, I'm sure you could agree with this, is having a sustained structure. The reason why the Dodgers, the Yanks, and all these teams are so appealing is not only because they've been consistent contenders, but if you look at their organization, there isn't too much change over the past decade. And there's reasons for that, because they've not only built trust, they found a success level, and that's why Chris Gross, that hire, I think, was great from the Astros, for example, for amateur scouting, and then player development in Andy Green. These are guys that we hope, along with Stearns, can be here for the next 5-10 plus years. And hopefully Mendoza will be molded into this long-term manager for the Mets. Once they really have that structure down, not only with that, but with the farm, they are going to find themselves in the same conversations year after year as these respective clubs. They're just not there yet, because unfortunately Rome wasn't built overnight. But now let's get into anything you'd like to add on from that, Joe?
Yeah, I mean, stability is the most important thing, and there needs to be some patience. That's one thing that's been lacking. Look, if things don't go great, you're not calling for the manager to be fired. You're not calling for the Mets have changed managers and heads of player development on an almost yearly basis for the last like 5 or 6 years. It's just constant changing over at the GM. Some things obviously off the field that cause those changes, but Steve Cohen needs to entrust David Stearns, and David Stearns needs to exude some patience amidst the market of fans, radio, television, content creators, everybody that puts extra pressure on them to win every year. And you have to let something build a little bit. David Stearns came in, and the first thing he did was trim the 40-man roster down to 27, because he saw a bunch of kind of like fat on the 40-man that he wanted nothing to do with. And it takes time to build that stuff back up. But I think you got to give David Stearns a shot. Look, this is a guy that we have talked about for years. Since Steve Cohen bought the team, we've basically been waiting for the day that David Stearns gets hired. Yeah,
everyone knows.
And finally gets the job. He has the job for less than 2 months, and all you hear is people, ripping into David Stearns. So it takes time. Like you said, Rome wasn't built in a day. You said it right, Wardy. And David Stearns has proven he's able to build an organization up. And this year, 2024, they're going to fill the holes that they have with competent Major League Baseball players. But what they're going to also do, which David Stearns said back at the GM meetings, they're going to build a roster with flexibility so young players can come up and have an opportunity, because young players need a chance. Brett Baty obviously had a very rough first full season in the big leagues.
Yep.
Ronnie Mauricio's injury helps. You got to let Brett Baty get another run. If anything is going to motivate the guy, you lost Mauricio. The job is, for all intents and purposes, yours to at least start out with. So this is the time to step up. And then you have Drew Gilbert coming on the way. You have Luis Angel Acuna on the way, Jet Williams. You have a slew of pitchers that are going to be at the upper levels with a Blade Tidwell, a Mike Vassell, a Christian Scott, a Dom Hamill, a Tyler Stewart. The Mets are going to set up their team where these young players are going to get a chance in 2024 to try to establish themselves ahead of a huge offseason a year from now, where it's, all right, do you need to go pay this and this and this because you have some prospects that you could rely on? And that is how you'll be able to more consistently be in the free agent market aggressively year after year. The more players you have making the minimum salary in your lineup or in your rotation, the more aggressive you could be to kind of fill in the spots around it.
Exactly, and that's been the Dodgers' MO for so long. Like, they, of course, have had an anomaly of an offseason here, but this has been a buildup. The Dodgers didn't do much last offseason for this exact reason, because they know that they have in-house options. They're always a top prospect pool, and that's going to continue to be the case for the next number of years, and rightfully so, and kudos to them for building a nice, sustained structure the way that they have. The Mets want to get to that level. They've done a really good job with their farm since Steve Cohen has become owner, all things considered, and really recouping things versus how things were under with Brody Van Wagenen and the Wilpons. But I got one question for you, Joe, before we get on to talking about DH, outfield, and some relievers. Do you agree or disagree that saving face holds true when it comes to losing Yamamoto here? Do you think the Mets are bound to do at least one move that is going to make plenty Mets fans happy? Not trying to be Artie Moreno and saying, hey, I'm going to invest in Anthony Rendon for the sake of doing it, because that's not the right thing to do. But do you think that this could at all factor into the Mets' interest level or lack thereof for a Pete Alonso extension? And on top of that, when looking at moves as a whole, could David Stearns get unique when it comes to the trade market? Because that is something that he's been very savvy in doing in years past, including the most recent deal he did with the Mets to land two areas of need for not even, it's killing two birds with not even one stone. I mean, a quarter of a stone at that.
Yeah. I would say there certainly is a possibility that they're going to do something to try to excite the fans. With that said, and I say this as a Mets fan that is obviously a podcast or content creator, and we're talking to, you said, hundreds of fans that are here watching right now. The reality is, if the Mets are making decisions to make me happy, they're doing the wrong thing.
Right.
They don't need to don't worry about making me happy. You know what makes me happy? Wins. Build a team that wins. I root for the team that's on the front of the jersey, not the players' names on the back. Ideally, you want to keep guys like Pete Alonso around, who are your homegrown superstars. But largely, if the Mets win, I'll learn to love every player on the team that wins. So I hope they're not going to make moves that are, we missed on Yamamoto. The fans are really pissed. Let's do something to make them happy.
And I think Blake Snell would be that type of signing, and that's why I don't want it to happen.
Yeah. With that said, if they sign Pete Alonso, I think some Met fans are going to be really excited about it, and some Met fans will be excited, but they'll also kind of be like, yeah, they wouldn't have done this if they signed Yamamoto. They're only doing this because they didn't sign Yamamoto, and they want to, I feel like you could just never win with us. We are a difficult bunch as Met fans. Yeah.
Oh my God.
Cannot win. So, as far as the trade market, I think that's somewhere where maybe David Stearns can be opportunistic. I know a lot of people kind of mocked the Adrian Hauser, Tyrone Taylor deal.
I don't think it's great.
Given where markets are at, they got a back end type of starter for $6 million or under $6 million projected. They got a fourth outfielder type. Like, basically Tyrone Taylor is Michael A. Taylor. Just they have the same last name. They're not related, but incredibly similar baseball players, except you get them for 3 years of control.
There you go. And he's younger on top of that, too.
Yeah.
So there's
Yeah.
plenty of appeal there. I was really actually taken back. Like, Stearns did fleece the Brewers in that deal. It was exactly what the Braves have done with, the Seattle Mariners, with the Chicago White Sox, being on the receiving end of salary dumps. And then from there, you can get creative. You can either keep those depth pieces to help. Again, you can never have enough depth. And that's exactly what the Mets have lacked so heavily since Cohen has become owner, which is why I have no issues with the Mets bolstering on depth. That should be the least of our complaints as fans. But because the Mets haven't done anything beyond depth moves, that's why the fans' patience has grown thin.
And I get
of course, every single day are going through. And I understand it, but, and we have to realize that it's important. It's very important to have structure here when looking at depth as a whole. But okay, so we talked about all those things, and I like those moves. I really do. And I think that is a great example of what David Stearns can provide to the Mets. Now it's a matter of once the prospect farm is to a point where they have a stronger willingness to part ways with guys, instead of it being, say, a Michael A. Taylor type, it's going to be a Randy Arozarena type. And that's what the confidence level I have in Stearns, even if it doesn't begin this offseason. But now let's get into talking about bats. We just discussed Randy. Let's get into DH and outfield fits, because the Mets need to address both areas of need. Unfortunately, you would think that after the shortened 2020 season, when the Mets were one of the best teams with the DH, thanks in large part to Dom Smith, in which he just had a tremendous little run there. Since then, they have been anything but a consistent club with the DH position, one of the worst in baseball, as a matter of fact. So where would you like to see the Mets go? Because we know that it seems like there's a heavy interest level, at least a certain level, with Justin Turner, which I think makes sense for more reasons than one. And then outfield-wise, this is the tricky one. We know the Mets tried hard for Manuel Margot, more so as a fourth outfield type. We know that they were one of the 4 teams for Alex Verdugo. They did not land him for obvious reasons. So could they go trade route when it comes to an everyday outfielder, or will they consider a Teoscar Hernandez, buying low on him, instead of maybe a 7-year deal that he would get if he had a breakout year with the Mariners, versus a 4-5-year deal, which he's more than likely projected to get this offseason? Let me know your thoughts about all that.
So they certainly need a DH. I mean, they had Daniel Vogelback and Darren Ruff. Like, the Mets have simply just not handled the DH position properly. And this happens despite what I said like 10 minutes ago about how weak the market is. It's a very robust market if you're looking for a designated hitter.
Yeah.
I mean, if you want a pure DH, JD Martinez is your guy. I mean, he seems like the timeless wonder that's just going to hit until his body completely gives out. So if you want a pure, he is just a DH. He is playing nowhere on the field for you, basically. JD Martinez is your guy. Justin Turner, obviously, like you said, Mike Puma at the Post, I believe, is the one that reported that they were in discussions with Turner. He makes sense from the perspective of he can play DH for you on most days. He could also be an insurance policy for Brett Beatty at third base. And he also played some first and surprisingly second base for the Red Sox
that was a
this
shocker.
year.
When I was looking at splits and fan graphs, I'm like, you played how many games at second base last season? I'm sure it wasn't great, but he's still at least able to field out there.
Right. He's athletic enough that you don't want to overdo it, because I think that's when the back will flare up and some things that he has dealt with. But certainly he can play defense to a degree. Then you can look at the outfield DH types, which is a very unique opportunity, because right now the Mets don't have a starting left fielder. A starting left fielder is Tyrone Taylor and DJ Stewart platoon. Like,
that
that's
ain't gonna fly.
That ain't gonna fly. And I don't think they intend for that to be the case. My co-host Connor Rogers, that you mentioned on the Mets pod, is a big proponent of Jorge Soler, who might be looking at like a 3-year type of deal. And when you think about it, he's not really a great defensive player anymore. He used to
putrid. I'm sorry. Yeah. He's bad.
he used to be okay. He's not so good anymore. But I think back in a way to Kyle Schwarber when he was a free agent. It's one of those things that when you look back, it's like the Mets probably should have been in on Kyle Schwarber. And the Phillies make it to the NLCS. They make it to the World Series, all those things. And they jam Kyle Schwarber in left field. Sometimes it goes really, really bad. But I wonder if the defensive value, you want a mix of run creation and run prevention, right? And that's where Tyrone Taylor can step in to help with some of the run prevention. But the Mets also need to work on run creation because they were 20th in the league in runs scored last year.
Mm-hmm.
So the reality is they need to do something at DH. And if that means signing a Jorge Soler for 3 years and dealing with the fact that maybe on occasion he has to play left field, like chances are you're not just going to lose that game or those games because Jorge Soler is standing in left field. So he obviously fits. Jock Peterson's another kind of like outfield DH type. But I would look at it as in an ideal world, I'm finding an outfielder that I can play every day. Ideally, it's a short-term deal. Maybe it's a trade. Like you mentioned, Alex Verdugo. Like I'm sure there's another rental outfielder out there available in trade that I just can't think of. And Mets could get that person on the low and, they can be an everyday player until Drew Gilbert's ready or Luis Angel Acuna's ready. And then Justin Turner, to me, is the DH I'd be most interested in. Proven, reliable hitter. I think another guy like JD Martinez that's going to hit until his body gives out. And it would be a good kind of full circle story of Justin Turner coming back to where it started and redeeming what was a messy end to his Mets tenure. And him being able to back up Brett Beatty in the case of necessity is obviously a good thing too.
Yeah, so, hopping on the Soler train again, I think Soler would be awesome, and I agree with you. I see the Schwarber similarities. It's like, yes, he's not going to necessarily hit for high average or OBP, but you're getting a lock of 40 bombs a year as long as he can stay healthy. Now, we know Soler has struggled to stay on the field at times throughout his career, so that's something to be mindful of.
Maybe being a DH helps with that because
exactly. If
he very recently transitioned to more DHing. Obviously, the DH is new, but he just recently transitioned to that. He was playing the outfield. So sometimes when you take a guy that's getting hurt, spanning right field every day, and you just take him and you're like, sit, hit, sometimes that helps be a little healthier.
Absolutely. And I think my biggest concern level with Soler is, one, we know the defense in the corner. It leaves a lot to be desired. If we're basing any truth to David Stearns having a heavy emphasis on run prevention, that in itself should be enough to say, hey, Soler is likely not going to come here. They're not going to prioritize him as much as others. However, you can, again, make the counter. Soler, DH, mainly DH, and then sometimes in left field. Wouldn't be opposed to that at all if he's a mainly DH, but we also haven't heard anything to indicate the Mets like the idea of signing a DH to a multi-year deal. Now, Could they? That's possible, but we've been led to believe the short-term routes are the more feasible ones. And JD Martinez would be fantastic, but if you're JD Martinez, why do you want to come to the Mets next season? Let's just start there. Like, numbers-wise, being in Citi Field, he's not getting any younger. If I'm him, I would probably prefer to go somewhere where you have a better chance to have a World Series aspirations next season versus what it'll be with the Mets, where you're in this transitionary playoff type contention year. I could of course be wrong, but that's the vibe I get from JD as much as I like him as a player. And Turner, as someone who I initially was a little bit more opposed to, I've definitely been in more favor of given the Mauricio injury, because JT provides something that JD Martinez, Jorge Soler simply can, and that is potential infield diversity. Not only that, just having the type of veteran, the mentor that Turner is, and he's had a great impact, not only the Dodgers for the past decade, but I've heard great things on how he helped Jarren Duran and others with the Red Sox this past season, really help boost their confidence and give little tidbits. I think that would bode so well for someone like Brett Beatty in particular. So for all those reasons, that's why Justin Turner, I think, is the guy for the Mets that they're likely going to land here for that spot. But I didn't hear any talk from Teoscar Hernandez from you. So are you not a team guy? Do you not have any interest there? Or do you think that he might just be out of the realm of possibility given what his contract demands will likely be?
I think if you're talking 4-5, like you mentioned, I can't imagine that's high on the Mets list, I would imagine. And he rightfully should get a deal like that. It's just one of those things that, is this the right time for the Mets to do that? Maybe the answer is yes. I'm not saying it's definitely no, but based on what they seem to be talking about, that one feels maybe a little unlikely, and maybe they'd go more a short-term guy, a Jock Peterson and Adam Duvall. Maybe if Tommy Pham's market kind of crashes back down to being short-term, maybe he could come back. So like there's some options to kind of fill the spot temporarily. But I actually wrote an article for SNY.TV that'll come out, I don't know, soon. I sent it in today, but soon enough it'll go about Drew Gilbert and how he is a young player that the Mets obviously got as the headlining piece of the Justin Verlander trade. Former first-round pick, was the Astros' #1 prospect when the Mets got him. He's probably going to start the year in AAA Syracuse, and if he hits in Syracuse at 23 years old, he could be up by like Memorial Day. I don't think that's unreasonable at all. And the Mets want to, I think, be careful in not blocking him from potentially coming up. Where if you sign a Teoscar Hernandez and maybe Starling Marte found the fountain of health and his groin's okay now and he might play winter ball, like who knows? Maybe he has a healthy year in 2024. I wouldn't bank on it, but if he did, you're kind of blocking Drew Gilbert's path to coming up almost regardless of what he does.
Yeah, no, Drew Gilbert is a great point, especially with the Mets' emphasis on wanting to give some of these kids a leash this year. And if we're evaluating it in that standpoint, yeah, T.O. feels more unlikely than likely. But naturally, as a fan and knowing the appeal he would have to the club right away, yes, he's
30 home runs. Who doesn't want
exactly. That? Yes, he's a big strikeout guy, but you can make the argument now's the time to buy on him because you are buying low, even though it will be a multi-year deal. You're getting multiple years younger than Starling Marte. He can still handle the corner perfectly fine. 30 bombs, 90 RBIs a year without a problem. The big thing will, of course, being that strikeout rate. Can he get that down a little bit, or is that going to be stagnant? Is that who he is now? I'm not entirely sure. He had a horrendous first half of the season with Seattle, but picked things up quite a bit in the second half. We know that. But when I think about short-term options, there is one name that definitely stands out to me, and that is a man that Billy Epler tried pretty hard to get last offseason, but he opted for an everyday role in Boston in Adam Duvall. So if you want to go for a short-term option with power for left field, I don't think you need to look much further than someone like him.
Yeah, Adam Duvall, he probably is on the list. Like when we're talking about starting pitchers to pursue, and we'll get to the bullpen relievers to pursue, it's just guys in tiers, right? Like at this point, I don't think it's so much it has to be this individual. Like, because a lot of these guys are pretty similar with, one person's war is they're not as good defensively. Another one is he doesn't hit for average. Like, they all have their own individual warts that they have, but you're kind of tiering guys together. So yeah, Adam Duvall falls into kind of that tier of, a possibility that could fit, like you said, short-term deal. And if you could keep him on the field, it's 20 plus home runs in left field. So obviously that's an intriguing guy.
Yeah, for sure. Duvall, it's about being on the field, but having someone like Tyrone Taylor, I could see getting, not a lot of starting reps, but if you're going to need someone to be in there because of injury, I certainly have a higher confidence level in him than, say, a Tim LeCastro, Travis Jankowski. Not to down Travis, he just won a World Series. He's an absolute beauty. So happy for him. But when you look at the options and when the Mets first acquired Tyrone, my initial reaction to that is, okay, he's not as good as Tommy Pham, but he is certainly a level up from the LeCasters and the Jakowski's world. So that's where he kind of finds himself in. Fastball hitter, again, not known for the contact, strikes out at a decent rate, but, definitely has appealing aspects to his game.
Really legitimate fast, power. I mean,
really fast too. 86th percentile in his speed, very strong glove, can play all outfield positions. Not opposed to that at all. But again, if you're going to go short term, Duvall, again, someone I spoke on months ago this offseason, could find himself in that mix. But before we go forward, shout out PB for upgrading membership on the channel. Thank you so much for that. One thing I do want to do as a joke, someone in the chat who's being a troll talking down on the Mets, funny enough, Camel shouted them. I saw them specifically in a Yankees chat yesterday weeping after finding out that Yamamoto didn't go to the Yanks. So if this is your way of coping, that's perfectly fine. But just know that I literally saw it yesterday. The exact same person being like, oh, I'm so upset, all these things. So whatever makes you happy at the end of the day. JV with a donation says real quick, been saying it all along, bring back the Wardy stare and we go back to the playoffs. That's funny. What that means, Joe, is for post-game shows, a lot of the times, sometimes I would cut them off after they were live so they were more consumable for people that just wanted, say, 20 minutes instead of 40 minutes. And what I would do then is I would let the live chat know that we're going to continue to be live, but for people on replay, this is where we cut things off. And I would stare in the camera for a solid 30 seconds to make sure I knew when to timestamp when I go back and edit it. So that's what JV's referring to. Yoshima with the donation now says, if there's any starting pitcher that the Mets will pursue via trade, it'd be Dylan Cease, in my opinion, because of the years of control he has. 2 years of control is definitely appealing for Cease, but given the type of trade bidding war we're in for him right now and the prospect return the White Sox are looking for, I'm going to go on a limb and say the Mets are not going to be active in that market. I think we're looking at 3 years plus of team control for David Stearns to really say, okay, we'll be willing to cough up some top prospects here.
And things are situational too.
Yeah.
We trade values are not in a vacuum. It's not like, I know there's that website where you could like baseball trade values or whatever, and you could like make up trades.
Yep.
It's not in a vacuum. The White Sox, they want young, big league ready starting pitching that's controllable in a deal for Dylan Cease. When they were talking to the Dodgers, they wanted Ryan Pepio, who went in the deal for Tyler Glasnow as part of the package for Dylan Cease. Are they going to want Tyler McGill? Are they going to want David Peters? You know, guys like that. Like, I don't think those are arms that are going to necessarily excite the White Sox. So when you think of trades, think not just like it's the number one prospect for this person. Each team has different needs, desires, and kind of what they're looking for. So feels like the White Sox aren't much of a fit. I would think if they're going to go the trade market, it's got to be something kind of out of left field. Like all we've done is hear about Dylan Cease, Shane Bieber, Corbin Burns. Like, you've heard about these names. When they made the trade for Adrian Hauser and Tyrone Taylor, smaller level, but that came out of nowhere. I didn't know that Milwaukee was, planning on dumping Hauser and Taylor. David Stearns was. So it's his job to know what's actually out there. And
Freddie
I assume
Peralta,
there's
you are a New York Met. That's what I'm hearing.
I assume there's more starting pitchers out there that we don't know are available, and we may one day refresh our Twitter, come on this channel, check out the Mets pod, and there'll be an emergency show that the Mets have traded for whoever. Insert your name there. So the trade market, I'm sure, will pick up a bit over the next month plus, and we'll see how aggressive the Mets are in that, because it's got to be the right value. Like, they were willing to part with Coleman Crowe in this deal. They're not unwilling to part with prospects at all. They're just being very selective in which prospects they'll part with.
Exactly. And if you're Stearns, I mean, how can you go wrong in this situation? Yes, you traded Coleman Crowe, who had a lot of upside when he was first drafted, and there's belief that down the road he could be something nice. I'm sure the Brewers will get something out of him because they tend to do well long term when it comes to deals like this. However, not even just around a top 30 prospect. I don't know where he was in your rankings. Was it 29? Do you remember where you had him?
So my rankings, my most recent one cut off at 20. I'm going to be doing 30 in my next update. And had he been here, he would not have made my top 30.
Okay,
so,
there you go. So
to me, it was a no-brainer.
Exactly. And on top of it, that was the acquisition in the Eduardo Escobar trade when that prospect was drafted by Billy Epler during his time with the Halos. So clearly Epler, of course, had an edge as to knowing the player. But now that's David Stearns, this is something that we see a lot. When front office changes, they are going to have a different perspective on the prospects that were coveted from previous front office. So because of that reason, it's the least bit shocking that the Mets parted with that player in particular. But let's now get into our final segment here before we wrap up the show, and that is the bullpen, Joe. I don't know where you stand. I know Andrew Chafin, it's not going to happen again. We all would have loved the guy. Another year, no Andrew. Unfortunately, this was the first offseason, Joe, where I did not talk about Andrew Chafin at all, because I was that confident that it's not happening. We've beaten that drum so long, and unfortunately it isn't going to be the case. But there's a lot of arms out there, and there's a couple that stand out to me. So I'm going to tell you 3 right now, or 4, that I would like to see the Mets at least pursue, if not land. And I understand with David Stearns, with this bullpen, he's going to be very creative by spreading as many eggs and as many baskets as possible versus putting all in 1 or 2. No, I'm sorry, folks. Josh Hader will not be a New York Met next season. But if there's one name that has at least backing where a lot of people know who he is and he's been in the game for a while, I think a reunion with David Robertson to finally be that setup man makes sense for more reasons than one. Should he want to return? I don't know if things have changed since the direction the club has changed a little bit. Adam Ottavino tried to restructure his contract. David Stearns says, no, thank you. I'm really not interested. And Adam's likely not coming back to the Mets now, even though I know he would like to return. Outside of Robertson, you, of course, also have Robert Stevenson coming from the Tampa Bay Rays, another arm that looks like a potential nice pickup this offseason. Matt Moore, who's been a favorite of mine the past 2 seasons since he has fully become a reliever with the Texas Rangers, the Halos, the Guardians, everywhere that he's been, he's had success over the past 2 years. So what do you like out of those names, and are there any other guys in particular that you're keeping an eye on for the bullpen this offseason?
Yeah, David Robertson, of course, kind of getting that Robertson Diaz 8-9 that we were hoping for last spring is an intriguing concept. Matt Moore, like you mentioned, could fit as that kind of that second lefty, but with a different look than what Brooks Raley brings to the table. Because that's one thing David Stearns has prioritized. I know that people are making fun of every player that he's acquired and all the relievers, and that's fine. You haven't heard of them. That's okay. But his priority here is he wants his relievers to all be different in the sense he doesn't want a bunch of fastball slider guys that throw straight four seam fastballs and same sliders. He wants different sinker looks, different sweeper looks, slider, curveball, upset. Like he wants when each reliever comes in, you're going to get a different look, whether that's their physical arm angle or kind of the outlook of their pitches. So obviously you mentioned those couple names. Ryan Stanek, I think, is one that fits a lot. He's had some success pitching late in games for Houston. Obviously this year was not his best year, but I think he has the kind of stuff that could translate because the Mets need an eighth inning guy.
Yes.
Someone like I want to go into the season saying the Mets have an 8-9, and then the rest you could figure out who pitches the seventh or whatever. You can figure out those things. But a guy like Ryan Stanek makes a lot of sense. Phil Maton makes sense. I mean, Wardy, the list is really long. The reliever market hasn't moved that much. So there's going to be a lot of opportunity for the Mets and for other teams to find value.
Right now. I don't know where you stand with Hector Neris, but I don't.
Yeah.
He was
you don't
great in
have to have
Houston. I see a lot of Jeurys Familia vibes. Should he come to Queens? On the latter end of Jeurys's career, because I remember his time thoroughly with Philly. And no matter how good the guy was when he would go through great stretches, the Mets always had his number. And that was a lesser Mets club throughout those years, might I add. So for just fan reasons, I don't want to see Hector Neris in a Mets uniform next season.
Yeah, well, then we'll say no Hector Neris. You hear this, David Stearns? No Hector Neris. We're out. But yeah, the market's big, so that they have a lot of options, and they like some of the people that they brought in. I think Johan Ramirez has a chance to be pretty unique, especially against right-handed hitters. I think he'll be much more successful, which obviously it's a little tougher to be kind of situational than it used to be with the three batter minimum. But if you're able to utilize him correctly, I think he could be effective. So yeah, there's more bullpen work to come. I would like two legitimate relievers, I think, if I could add to this bullpen. And then from there, we could play the game of who David Stearns has kind of found under the rock and, try to uncover something.
It's funny that you bring up the rules and how they, of course, come into play when evaluating your bullpen. Well, there's a recent rule now that has changed for the upcoming season that will too play a part, knowing that if you are a reliever warming up the inning prior and you don't pitch, you still have to face at minimum one batter now, which is going to create a whole new dynamic for how teams go about their bullpens for the 2024 season and beyond. I think that's a bit too nitpicky and tedious, but I'm going to leave that for now because I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole. So we're going to go a whole other hour if I break down all the rule changes in MLB and the union in recent years. But I think that's going to do it, guys. We went a bit longer than I was anticipating, but you guys have been great with the viewership. Thank you so much for that. Joe, fantastic conversation. Definitely want to have you on here. It's been a while, like I said, and definitely will not be the last time we see from you, I'm sure. So I'm wishing you the best of luck with everything with Connor as you guys continue to do great work for the Mets pod through SNY. But before I let you go, let's hear your final remarks and where people can find you and your work.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate talking to you again. It's been a minute since we did it kind of in this format. So you could follow me on Twitter because I still call it Twitter at PSL to Flushing. Check out the Mets pod for SNY. You could anywhere you get your podcast, it's there, or you could go on SNY's YouTube channel and you can see this face and a better looking one that's sitting next to me. Every episode is recorded on video, so you could check that out. And of course, go vote for us for the Sports Podcast Awards. We'd really, really love to be able to take one of those home. And appreciate it as always, man. And we'll catch up soon.
Sounds great, Joe. Again, shout out to everyone that chimed in live and on replay. Let us know your thoughts in the comments below for people on replay. Your biggest takeaway from tonight's live show, and what do you believe the Mets are going to do next this offseason? Until then, have a great rest of your night, day, evening, and whenever you're watching this. That's Joe Demayo. This is Tyler Ward, and we're signing out.